The morning sun cast long shadows across the Houston streets as Dr. Sarah Mitchell glanced at her car's digital display. 7:42 a.m. Her presentation at the Space Center was scheduled for 8:00 a.m. sharp, and she had precisely 18 minutes to make what was typically a 25-minute drive. The familiar weight of her mission patch pressed against her chest beneath her crisp navy blazer, a constant reminder of the responsibilities awaiting her. Inside her Tesla Model 3, the navigation system offered an alternative route promising to shave off precious minutes. Sarah quickly calculated the risks. She had never received a traffic ticket in her 15 years of driving, and her record at NASA was equally spotless. Today's presentation would determine critical aspects of next month's mission to the International Space Station. Being late wasn't an option. The morning traffic flowed smoothly until she approached the intersection of Bay Area Boulevard and Space Center Drive. The light turned yellow just as she reached the critical decision point. That moment where drivers must choose between a hard stop or a quick acceleration. Sarah made a split-second calculation, the kind she was trained for as an astronaut. The intersection was clear, her speed was consistent, and based on the timing, she would clear the intersection before the light turned red. The flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror came as a surprise. Sarah smoothly pulled over, her mind already racing through protocols and procedures. As an astronaut, she was trained to handle unexpected situations with calm precision. She reached for her glove compartment, retrieving her license and registration before the officer approached. The police officer, a young man who appeared to be in his early 30s, approached her vehicle with measured steps. Sarah noticed how his hand rested casually on his belt, his expression neutral but watchful. She kept both hands visible on the steering wheel, her NASA ID badge clearly visible on the lanyard around her neck. License and registration, the officer stated flatly, his flashlight beam sweeping across her interior despite the morning sunlight. Sarah handed over her documents with a polite smile, maintaining her professional composure. "Good morning, officer. Was there a problem?" she inquired calmly, her voice carrying the same measured tone she used during mission communications. The officer barely glanced at her as he examined her documents. "You ran a yellow light that was turning red. That's a violation of Traffic Code 545.151. Sarah's mind quickly processed this information. "Sir, I respectfully disagree. I was already in the intersection when the light was yellow, and I maintained a safe, consistent speed throughout." The officer's expression remained unchanged as he returned to his patrol car. Through her rearview mirror, Sarah watched him typing into his computer. Her phone buzzed with a message from the mission control team. Presentation delayed 15 minutes due to technical setup. Don't rush. The irony wasn't lost on her. When the officer returned, his demeanor hadn't changed. He handed her a citation along with her documents, reciting the standard procedures for either paying the fine or contesting it in court. Sarah accepted the paperwork gracefully, knowing that getting into an argument would only waste more time. As she watched the patrol car pull away, Sarah checked her watch again. 7:55 a.m. The delay had cost her valuable time, but years of astronaut training had taught her that maintaining composure under pressure was crucial. She carefully placed the citation in her briefcase, next to the folder containing her presentation on the upcoming mission's zero-gravity experiments. The Space Center's familiar silhouette loomed ahead as she pulled back into traffic, her mind already shifting to the complex scientific protocols she would be presenting to the mission team. This traffic stop was just another challenge to navigate, and navigation was something Dr. Sarah Mitchell did exceptionally well, whether on Earth or among the stars. The Mission Control Center buzzed with its usual intensity as Dr. Sarah Mitchell led her team through another rigorous simulation. Holographic displays of the International Space Station's modules floated before them, while screens filled with data streams covered every wall. 21 days remained until launch, and every minute was precisely scheduled. "Running Scenario Delta 7, Sarah announced, her voice steady as she guided her crew through a simulated oxygen recycling system failure. Her hands moved efficiently across the control panel, demonstrating the exact sequence they would need to follow in space. The traffic citation lay buried in her briefcase, but its presence weighed on her mind like an unbalanced thrust vector. The simulation ended successfully, and Dr. James Wong, the mission director, approached with an iPad in hand. "Excellent work, Sarah. The crew's response time has improved by 12%. However," he paused, scrolling through his device, "there's a flag in your pre-launch clearance checklist." Sarah knew what was coming. NASA's procedures were meticulous, requiring all crew members to resolve any pending legal matters before launch. Even a simple traffic citation needed to be addressed. "I'm handling it, James. The court date is next week, during the maintenance window we scheduled for the EVA suits." The mission director nodded, but his expression remained concerned. "Just ensure it's resolved before the final medical evaluations. We can't have any loose ends, especially with the new quantum communication experiment on board." Back in her office, Sarah pulled up her calendar. Between the daily simulations, medical screenings, media briefings, and equipment checks, finding time for a court appearance felt like plotting an orbital insertion with minimal fuel. Her computer screen displayed a reminder about tomorrow's centrifuge training, a crucial session she couldn't reschedule. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the mission's medical officer, entered with a stack of papers. "Sarah, I need your signature on these health protocols. Also," she added, lowering her voice, "I heard about the citation. Need any help rearranging the medical screenings?" Sarah managed a small smile. "Thanks, Elena, but I'll make it work. We can't risk delaying the hyperbaric chamber tests." She signed the documents while pulling up the court's website on her second monitor. The system seemed unnecessarily complicated, clearly not designed by NASA engineers. Later that afternoon, during a brief lunch break, Sarah called the courthouse to confirm her appearance time. The clerk's voice was bored and mechanical. "Traffic court. Judge Harrison presiding. 9 a.m. sharp. Bring your citation and valid ID." As she hung up, her phone buzzed with a message from Mission Control. An unexpected solar flare might require adjustments to their launch window. Sarah quickly finished her lunch, her mind already calculating how to compress next week's schedule to accommodate both the court appearance and the potential launch window modifications. In the corridor leading to the simulation chamber, Sarah passed the wall of photographs showing previous ISS crews. Her own image from her last mission caught her eye. Floating in zero gravity, installing the new solar panels that now powered the station. The memory strengthened her resolve. This traffic citation was just another challenge to overcome, another problem to solve with the same precision and dedication she applied to her work among the stars. The afternoon sun streamed through the center's windows, casting long shadows across the floor as Sarah headed to her next briefing. Her NASA badge reflected the light, a reminder of everything she had achieved and everything still awaiting her in orbit. 21 days until launch, and not a single detail could be left unresolved, even if it meant facing a traffic court judge who might not understand the pressing nature of her schedule. The Harris County Courthouse stood imposing against the morning sky, its limestone facade glowing in the early sunlight. Dr. Sarah Mitchell climbed the worn steps precisely at 8:45 a.m., her heels clicking against the marble in a steady rhythm. She had chosen her attire carefully. A charcoal gray suit that spoke of professionalism, paired with a blue silk blouse that matched the NASA logo on the folder she carried. The security line moved slowly. Sarah watched as the elderly security guard greeted each person with varying degrees of warmth. When her turn came, she placed her briefcase on the conveyor belt and stepped through the metal detector. It beeped. Her NASA access card had a metallic strip. "Arms out, please," the female security officer instructed, her wand hovering over Sarah's jacket. Sarah complied, noticing how the other visitors watched the procedure with mixed expressions. The officer paused at Sarah's NASA ID, her eyebrows rising slightly. "You work at the Space Center?" "Yes, I'm an astronaut," Sarah replied quietly, Conscious of the growing line behind her, the officer's professional demeanor softened slightly, but the moment passed quickly as she waved Sarah through. The courthouse corridors were a maze of activity. Lawyers in expensive suits hurried past with arms full of documents, while nervous citizens clutched papers and checked room numbers repeatedly. Sarah consulted the building directory, locating courtroom 4B, Traffic Division. The wooden benches in the courtroom were already filling up when she arrived. Sarah chose a seat near the middle, placing her briefcase neatly beside her. A young intern in an ill-fitting suit was organizing files at the clerk's desk, while a bailiff stood stoically by the judge's empty chair. As she waited, Sarah reviewed her mission notes on her tablet. The latest solar flare predictions suggested they might need to adjust their radiation shielding protocols. She was deep in calculations when she felt someone sit down beside her. First time in traffic court. The woman was older, with kind eyes, and a worn leather purse clutched in her lap. "Yes," Sarah answered, offering a polite smile. "I hope it's also the last." "Judge Harrison can be tough," the woman warned in a whispered tone. "My nephew was here last week for a broken taillight." The judge barely let him explain before issuing the fine. Sarah nodded, absorbing this information while maintaining her composure. Her training had taught her to gather all available data before any mission, and this was no different. She observed as more people filed in, noting the subtle hierarchies that emerged: the regulars who greeted each other with familiar nods, the first-timers who shifted nervously in their seats. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise," the Honorable Judge William Harrison presiding. The judge entered, his black robe flowing behind him. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had seen thousands of cases, each one blending into the next. He settled into his chair with practiced efficiency, adjusting his reading glasses as he surveyed the crowded room. Sarah straightened her spine, the same way she did during mission briefings. She had memorized the relevant traffic codes and prepared a clear, concise explanation of the yellow light incident. As an astronaut, she was used to operating under pressure, making split-second decisions where lives hung in the balance. This courtroom was just another type of mission control, she told herself, with its own protocols and procedures to navigate. The clerk began calling names, and Sarah noticed how the judge's attention varied with each case. Some received cursory glances, while others drew sharp questions. She calculated approximately 15 minutes per case, mentally adjusting her schedule for the possibility of a longer wait. Her phone vibrated silently. A message from Mission Control about the afternoon's spacewalk simulation. Sarah dismissed it quickly, knowing that right now, her full attention needed to be here, in this courtroom, preparing for her own moment before the bench. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the clerk's voice echoed through the courtroom. Case number 247. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah rose smoothly from her seat, adjusting her blazer with the same precision she used when checking her spacesuit seals. As she approached the podium, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes following her movement. Judge William Harrison barely glanced up from his stack of papers, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. His fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on his desk as he flipped through her file. The morning had already seen 23 cases, and to him, this appeared to be just another routine traffic violation. "Ms. Mitchell," he began, deliberately ignoring the doctor prefix on her citation, "you're here for running a yellow light on Bay Area Boulevard. How do you plead?" Sarah stood straight, her posture reflecting years of military and NASA training. "Your Honor, I respectfully plead not guilty. If I may explain the circumstances." The judge's hand rose, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Ms. Mitchell, I've heard every possible explanation for running a yellow light. My time is valuable, and there are many cases on today's docket." He peered at her over his glasses, his expression a mixture of boredom and mild irritation. "I understand, Your Honor," Sarah responded evenly, her voice carrying the same calm authority she used during mission communications. "However, I believe the specific timing and circumstances of this incident are relevant to." "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Harrison interrupted again, shuffling papers on his desk. The officer's report clearly states that you entered the intersection as the light was changing. That's a violation of Traffic Code 545.151. The fine is $175. Sarah remained composed, though she noticed the bailiff shifting his weight, perhaps sensing her frustration. She reached into her briefcase, retrieving her presentation folder. Your Honor, I have documentation regarding my position and schedule that day. As a NASA mission specialist preparing for an upcoming launch, The judge's eyebrows rose slightly, his first real reaction since she'd approached the bench. Did you say NASA? His tone carried a hint of skepticism, as if he'd heard every creative excuse in his years on the bench. Yes, Your Honor, Sarah replied, opening her folder. I'm currently preparing for a mission to the International Space Station, scheduled to launch in 18 days. On the morning in question, I was en route to a critical pre-launch briefing. I made a calculated decision based on velocity, distance, and safety parameters. The same kind of calculations I make regularly as an astronaut. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Harrison's hand stilled on his desk, and for the first time, he looked directly at Sarah. His eyes moved from her professional attire to the NASA insignia on her documentation, then back to her face. The skepticism in his expression began to wrestle with uncertainty. You expect me to believe, he began slowly, that you're an astronaut. His tone suggested he was waiting for the punchline of what he assumed was an elaborate excuse. Sarah maintained eye contact, her composure unwavering. She reached for her NASA credentials, placing them on the judge's desk alongside photographs from her previous spacewalks. Yes, Your Honor. I've logged over 2,000 hours in space, including multiple EVAs. That's spacewalks, and I'm scheduled to serve as mission specialist on Expedition 69 to the International Space Station. The courtroom had fallen completely silent. Even the clerk had stopped shuffling papers, all eyes now fixed on the unfolding scene. Judge Harrison picked up Sarah's credentials, examining them with growing astonishment. The morning's routine traffic court had suddenly become anything but routine. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B had transformed from drowsy routine to electric anticipation. Judge Harrison held Sarah's NASA credentials in hands that had suddenly grown careful, as if handling precious artifacts. His earlier dismissiveness had evaporated, replaced by an expression of growing comprehension. These credentials, he began, clearing his throat. They're quite impressive, Dr. Mitchell. The honorific he had earlier ignored now came naturally to his lips. But could you elaborate on your current mission preparations? Sarah reached into her briefcase again, this time extracting a tablet showing a 3D rendering of the International Space Station. Certainly, Your Honor. I'm leading a series of critical experiments on quantum entanglement communication in zero gravity. Our findings could revolutionize secure data transmission across space. She swiped through several images. Herself in NASA's neutral buoyancy laboratory, training underwater in a full spacewalk suit. Another of her floating in zero gravity during a previous mission. And finally, her official mission patch for the upcoming launch. This will be my third mission to the ISS, Sarah continued, her voice steady and professional. On the morning in question, I was heading to a crucial pre-launch briefing. As an astronaut, safety is paramount in everything we do. The decision to proceed through the yellow light was made after calculating the intersection's timing, my vehicle's velocity, and potential risk factors. The same type of split-second decisions we make in space. Judge Harrison leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. You mentioned quantum entanglement, Dr. Mitchell. Could you explain that in layman's terms? Of course, Sarah replied, warming to the subject. Imagine sending a message that's impossible to intercept because the very act of interference would destroy the information. We're testing this technology in space because quantum states are better preserved in zero gravity. The implications for global security are significant. The spectators in the courtroom listened intently, many recording on their phones. The clerk had stopped pretending to organize files, and even the bailiff had shifted closer to hear better. Judge Harrison studied the mission patch on his desk, his fingers tracing the embroidered edges. "Dr. Mitchell, your work is extraordinary, but I'm curious. How do you handle the pressures of such responsibility?" Sarah's response was measured but passionate. "Your Honor, every astronaut understands that our actions reflect on NASA and our country. Whether we're executing a spacewalk or driving to the Space Center, we're trained to make decisions based on data, safety, and precision. That morning, I applied the same principles to my driving that I apply to operating the station's robotic arm or conducting high-risk experiments in space." She gestured to the citation on the judge's desk. The yellow light lasted 4.5 seconds. My vehicle's velocity was 35 miles per hour. The intersection was clear, and hard braking would have created more risk than maintaining a steady speed through the yellow light. "These aren't excuses, Your Honor. They're the kind of calculations that come naturally after years of spaceflight training." The judge removed his reading glasses, polishing them thoughtfully with his robe. The morning sun streaming through the high windows caught the lenses, creating brief flashes of light that seemed to punctuate the silence. The same sunlight that in just 18 days, Dr. Mitchell would see from 254 miles above Earth's surface. In that moment, the traffic citation seemed to shrink in significance compared to the responsibilities awaiting Sarah Mitchell in orbit. The courtroom had become a space where preconceptions collided with reality, where the simple act of looking beyond first impressions revealed something extraordinary. The silence in courtroom 4B stretched like the vast expanse of space itself. Judge Harrison's demeanor had transformed completely as he studied the array of credentials and achievements spread across his bench. His earlier impatience had dissolved into genuine fascination. "Dr. Mitchell," he began, his voice carrying a newfound respect, "your record is remarkable. 2,000 hours in space, that's extraordinary. Could you tell us about your most memorable moment up there?" Sarah's eyes lit up with the kind of passion that only comes from living one's dreams. "There was a moment during my last spacewalk, Your Honor, when I was installing new solar panels on the International Space Station. Earth hung below me, this brilliant blue marble wrapped in clouds. That's when it really hits you, how fragile our world is, and how everyone down there is connected, regardless of our perceived differences." The judge nodded thoughtfully, then turned to one of the mission photos. "I see here you were the lead engineer on the quantum communication project. The technical expertise required for such work must be immense." "Yes, Your Honor. We undergo years of specialized training. Every astronaut must master multiple disciplines: engineering, physics, medical procedures, and even basic plumbing," Sarah explained, drawing a gentle laugh from the courtroom audience. "In space, we're responsible for millions of dollars worth of equipment, but more importantly, we're responsible for advancing human knowledge and understanding." A young girl in the gallery raised her hand, unable to contain her excitement. The bailiff moved to quiet her, but Judge Harrison waved him off. "Let her speak," he said, his usual strict courtroom protocol softening in the face of this extraordinary situation. "Dr. Mitchell," the girl called out, her voice trembling with excitement, "do you really live in space?" Sarah turned to address the girl directly, her smile warm and encouraging. "For months at a time, the space station becomes our home, laboratory, and workplace all in one. We conduct experiments that could help us cure diseases, understand climate change, and maybe someday help us reach Mars." Judge Harrison watched this interaction with growing appreciation. He picked up the traffic citation, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time. "Dr. Mitchell, given your track record of precision and responsibility, not to mention your current mission preparations," he paused, reaching for his gavel, "I believe we can properly contextualize the events of that morning." The clerk straightened in his chair, pen poised above his notepad. The regular courthouse visitors, who had seen thousands of traffic cases, leaned forward in their seats. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something unprecedented in courtroom 4B. Furthermore, the judge continued, I believe your presence here today has provided this court with something far more valuable than a traffic fine. You've reminded us that extraordinary individuals walk among us every day, and that our assumptions," he glanced around the courtroom meaningfully, "can sometimes blind us to the remarkable people before us." Sarah stood quietly, her posture remaining professional, but with a gentle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The morning sun had climbed higher, streaming through the courthouse windows and catching the NASA insignia on her credentials, making it gleam like a distant star. The young girl in the gallery was now sketching something in her notebook, what looked like a rough drawing of a spacewalk, complete with stars and a floating astronaut. Her mother watched proudly, perhaps seeing her daughter's future transforming before her eyes. Judge Harrison removed his reading glasses and placed them carefully on his desk. The familiar action, performed thousands of times before, somehow felt different now. He cleared his throat, his usual authoritative courtroom voice softening into something more personal and genuine. "Dr. Mitchell," he began, standing up behind his bench, an unusual gesture that caused the bailiff to shift uncertainly. "Before I make my ruling, I owe you an apology. When you first entered this courtroom, I made assumptions. I failed to extend you the basic courtesy of your proper title, and I dismissed your attempts to explain your situation." The courtroom remained silent, witness to this rare moment of judicial humility. Sarah stood steadily at the podium, her expression open and attentive. "In 30 years on this bench," the judge continued, "I've developed certain habits, patterns of thinking that I believed helped me process cases efficiently. Today, you've shown me the cost of such efficiency when it comes at the expense of truly seeing the person before me." He stepped down from the bench, another unprecedented action that caused a ripple of whispers through the gallery. Walking over to the evidence table, he gathered Sarah's NASA credentials and documentation with careful hands. "Your work," he said, holding up the mission patch, "represents the highest achievements of human potential. You're literally pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, conducting experiments that could transform our understanding of the universe." He handed her credentials back personally, rather than having the clerk do it. "And yet here I was, treating you with less consideration than your accomplishments and character deserve." Sarah accepted her documents, maintaining her professional composure even as the emotional weight of the moment filled the courtroom. "Your Honor, I appreciate your words. In space, we have a saying. There are no borders visible from orbit. Up there, we see humanity as one community, facing the same challenges, sharing the same hopes." Judge Harrison nodded thoughtfully, returning to his bench. "That perspective would serve us well down here." He picked up his gavel, then paused. "Dr. Mitchell, would you be willing to speak to our youth outreach program? We have many young people who come through this courthouse who could benefit from hearing your story." "I would be honored, Your Honor," Sarah replied warmly. "NASA encourages us to engage with communities. It's part of our mission to inspire the next generation." The judge smiled, his usual stern demeanor transformed. "Then let's make that part of my ruling." He straightened in his chair, assuming his official posture once more. "In the matter of citation number 247, this court finds the defendant not guilty. Furthermore," he continued, his voice carrying clearly through the now-packed courtroom, "Dr. Mitchell has agreed to speak at our youth program, turning what could have been a simple traffic fine into an opportunity for community enrichment." As he brought down his gavel, the sound echoed through the courtroom like a launching rocket's countdown reaching zero. The clerk began gathering paperwork, but stopped when Judge Harrison raised his hand. "One more thing, Dr. Mitchell. When is your launch date? I believe this courthouse would benefit from following your mission." He gestured to the young girl in the gallery, still clutching her drawing. "I think we've all become invested in your journey now." 3 months later, courtroom 4B looked remarkably different. The usually austere walls now display a large monitor showing the International Space Station's live orbit tracker, and beside it hung a framed photo of Dr. Sarah Mitchell's crew launch. Judge William Harrison glanced at it frequently throughout his sessions, a reminder of the day that changed his perspective forever. The youth program had blossomed beyond anyone's expectations. Every month, Dr. Mitchell's recorded messages from space were played for local school groups visiting the courthouse. Her words about unity, persistence, and the view of Earth from space had become a powerful tool for inspiration, particularly for young girls interested in science and space exploration. When I looked down at Earth, her latest message played, floating in the space station's cupola, I don't see the boundaries we've drawn on maps. I see one world, filled with infinite possibilities for those brave enough to dream big and work hard. Judge Harrison had implemented significant changes in his courtroom procedures. Every case now received his full attention, every person their complete dignity. He'd initiated a courthouse-wide training program on unconscious bias, using his own experience with Dr. Mitchell as a powerful example of how first impressions could blind one to human potential. The young girl who had been present that day, Jenny Martinez, had started a space club at her middle school. The drawing she'd made during the hearing hung proudly in the courthouse lobby, alongside real Nissa photos. Her club members regularly attended courthouse educational sessions, where they learned about both law and space exploration. Today, Judge Harrison sat in his chambers, reviewing his morning docket while a news broadcast played quietly in the background. The reporter's voice caught his attention. And now, live from the International Space Station, Dr. Sarah Mitchell is preparing for a groundbreaking quantum communication experiment. He turned up the volume, watching as Sarah floated in zero gravity, her NASA uniform bearing the same mission patch he'd held in his hands that transformative morning. She was explaining complex scientific concepts with the same clarity and patience she'd shown in his courtroom. The bailiff knocked and entered. Your Honor, the first case is ready, but you might want to see this first. He handed over a letter bearing NASA's official letterhead. Inside was an invitation to be a special guest at Dr. Mitchell's landing ceremony, along with a note written in her familiar, precise handwriting. Dear Judge Harrison, as I prepare to return to Earth, I'm reflecting on the unexpected ways our paths cross and change us. That morning in your courtroom could have been just another traffic case. Instead, it became a reminder that justice, like space exploration, requires us to look beyond our immediate assumptions and reach for something greater. The quantum communication experiments have been successful beyond our expectations. We're proving that particles separated by vast distances remain connected, much like human beings, when we allow ourselves to truly see each other. I'd be honored if you'd attend the landing ceremony. Bring Jenny and her space club. The next generation of explorers should see where their dreams can take them. Ad Astra, Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Judge Harrison smiled, carefully folding the letter. Outside his chamber windows, Houston's morning traffic flowed as usual along Bay Area Boulevard, the same intersection where this story began. But now, those yellow lights represented something different, moments of decision that could lead to unexpected discoveries, if only we keep our minds and hearts open to the extraordinary possibilities in every ordinary moment.